But you're really going to win it over the next 2 weeks when we declare total victory. It'll be a total victory. It'll happen very soon.
President Trump vowing tonight that a total victory will be achieved in Iran, as you heard, in the next 2 weeks. Live look at Tel Aviv right now, where there is an increasingly unstable situation. The ceasefire is hanging by a thread. Over the weekend, Iran and Israel exchanged strikes for the first time since the ceasefire began. We've told you this for a while now. The president's options keep getting worse every day, and Iran knows it. Iran's strike over the weekend both validate and indict Trump's strategy for dealing with the mullahs. Why? Trump's ever-changing deadlines and refusal to back up any of his red lines have emboldened the regime. Israeli journalist Amit Segal, writing 2 months of projected American weakness and a blind obsession with securing a deal, have brought us straight to this moment. Tehran smells the desperation, knows exactly what the U.S. is terrified of losing. All true. That said, Iran also feels cornered by Trump's success. He is the first president to confront Iran. He's also the first president, which is perhaps even scarier to the mullahs, to isolate Iran. And he wants to do it more. The president called for an aggressive expansion of the Abraham Accords as part of any Iran deal. Let's not forget the Iran-backed Hamas terror attack on Israel on October 7th was all to try and disrupt a possible Saudi Arabia-Israeli peace deal. Iran knows how vulnerable it is if it gets isolated. In a moment, Ambassador Nathan Sales, Brigadier General John Teichert, first NewsNation's Libby Dean in Washington, on what the White House views as its red lines going forward. Good evening, Libby.
Good evening, Leland. Well, at nearly every turn during the ceasefire, we've seen President Trump. He's really been in search of a diplomatic solution. You've heard him say it, this potential deal with Iran. That really hasn't changed despite Israel and Iran exchanging fire over the weekend, as you laid out. He worked to essentially de-escalate what became a heated situation over the weekend, getting Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu on the phone this morning and also warning him in that phone call to keep military action limited. The president is still insisting, though, a deal is going to happen soon, writing only ignorance and stupidity could get in the way of a deal. He posted that this morning. That deal includes, of course, what he's been saying from the beginning, Iran not having a nuclear weapon, something the president insists that Iran has agreed to, even saying tonight, as you played off the top, Leland, that during a tele-rally, the U.S. Will declare victory over Iran in 2 weeks. That was the latest comments from the president as we've seen these very high tensions between Israel and Iran. And he's also got this big week ahead, Leland. It'll end with his birthday and then that UFC fight as well. And then he'll head to the G7 for that summit. He's still planning to attend, Leland.
All right. Sounds good. Former ambassador at large and coordinator for counterterrorism, Nathan Sales, former Air Force combat pilot, former Assistant Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force, Brigadier General John Teichert. Gents, good to see both of you. Ambassador, you and I both spent a lot of time in the Middle East in dealing with these people in different capacities, but I always looked towards actions, not words. Has Iran done anything to show they want a deal?
Absolutely not. What they are doing is what they always do, which is use diplomacy as a smokescreen to run some clock and try and outlast the United States or get some sort of better arrangement for themselves. American diplomacy is most effective when it is backed by the credible threat of military force. That doesn't mean we have to start bombing today, but what it does mean is the Iranians are never going to take us seriously if they think that we're unafraid, if they think we're afraid of using military force. They clearly are not afraid of using it, and they think they've got our number right now, and that's not a good situation for us to be in.
There are situations in which your position gets stronger over time. There's positions in which your situation gets weaker over time. General, what position is President Trump in?
Leland, we are 9 weeks into a 2-week ceasefire and getting weaker by the moment. And the problem is that every time Iran has provoked us in the last 9 weeks, our response has been minimalist and almost apologetic and defensive only in nature. And that does embolden the regime and put us in a worse and worse position over time.
Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to understand that, or maybe even be scared of it. Here he is today warning Iran that Israel and the United States may respond differently. Take a listen.
If the terrorist regime makes the mistake of attacking us again, we will respond with force, because Israel has the full right to self-defense, and we exercise it whenever necessary. I say this to you, dear citizens of Israel, just as I say it with appreciation and respect in my good conversations with my friend, President Trump.
Ambassador, how does Netanyahu play this to his local audience, to his constituents in Israel, to the Middle East, and I think maybe even more importantly to the domestic political audience in America, where Israel's influence in American politics, shall we say, is a topic of conversation?
Well, he's walking a tightrope right now, Leland. He wants to keep President Trump and the United States very close, but he also has to make sure that he has deterrence against Iran so that Iran does not feel that it can attack Israel directly or via proxies like Hezbollah without having to pay a price. And that's the question. Like, when President Trump and when the United States show patience, that's not something that Benjamin Netanyahu shows. When the United States shows patience, the Iranians interpret that wrongly as weakness. So you've got to flip the script and reorient the conversation.
So this is Vice President Vance talking about his view, the administration's view of the Iranians.
Let's be honest, Jesse, the Iranians don't want this war to continue. It's not in their best interest. And I think they're coming to the table, putting some real things on the table. We're, of course, going to verify it. But if we get to this deal, it's going to be a home run win for the American people.
This has been sort of the shift, right, General, as you pointed out, 9 weeks into a 2-week ceasefire. But to be fair to President Trump, he's sitting there having listened to both the Israelis and the CIA tell him that there was going to be this massive uprising inside of Iran and that somehow the regime was so weak it would fall. None of that materialized during the war. Is he right to be perhaps suspicious, if not resident, to say, I don't know what more war is going to get me?
Leland, I understand his inclination to be concerned or skeptical, but the only way you compel an adversary to do the things that they wouldn't otherwise do is to increase the costs and increase the risks to them of not doing those things. And until he shows a demonstration that we are serious in backing up our diplomacy with force, then he can't expect that Iran is going to be compelled to do the things that we want them to do and to make a deal that's in our strategic interests. In spite of his hesitancy, he needs to understand that truth and convey more strength.
Yeah, the Middle East is much like a prison yard in its dynamics. Ambassador Nathan Sales, General John Teichert, gents, excellent analysis. Thank you both.